thankful to our Master Jesus for another opportunity of being reunited in His name, with our hearts full of gratitude. We ask permission to start our meeting. So be it. So, good evening, everyone. We are back to the Spirit's book. We are on chapter 12 of book 3. And we are going to talk about selfishness today, which is a very interesting subject. Before we start, I'm going to give you a definition of selfishness according to the dictionary. So we start on the same page. It's the quality or state of being selfish, a concern for one's own welfare or advantage at the expense of or in disregard of others. Okay, so you can see by the definition that it is in principle negative. Okay, contrary to passions that we studied last week that are important and are part of our evolvement, and how we use them is what makes the difference. Selfishness is never going to bring us positive results. It's always going to be harmful to us. Okay, so Paco, you're going to read. You are muted, so let me unmute you. There you go. And let me share the book here 1 second. We are on question 913. Okay, question 913.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay. What selfishness, what vice may we label as the root of the others? Selfishness, as we have repeatedly told you, every wrongdoing can be traced back to selfishness. Study all the vices, and you will see that selfishness is at the root of them all. You will never succeed in eradicating them until you attack them at their root. Only then you have destroyed the selfishness that is the cause. All your efforts should be focused on these ends, as selfishness is the plague of human society. All those who attempt to reach moral excellence must uproot every selfish feeling from their hearts, because it is incompatible with justice, love, and charity. It upsets all other qualities. Wow.
Yes. So going back to definition here, a concern for one's own welfare or advantage at the expense of or in disregard of others.
Exactly.
So you see that in the end, selfishness, every time you are thinking of yourself and not thinking of others, you are taking advantage of others, even if it's involuntarily, you are being selfish. So the root of all our vices, as the spirits tell us here, can be traced to selfishness. Is the root of them all. So why do we are selfish? That will be the question, right? Throughout our evolution, we started with the instinct of survival that we bring from even the vegetable phase and through the animal phase, makes us think about ourselves before others, to try to protect ourselves before others. And as we evolve, this develops into trying to take advantage of things available to us, even if it is in detriment of others. So it is something that it generates from our primitive state as we evolve as human
Okay,
beings.
very good. That's what my question. Yeah.
Yeah, and that in the end, we are only going to reach moral and intellectual perfection. We're going to reach perfection when we uproot it, when selfishness no longer becomes a part of who we are. Until then, until we have any trace of selfishness, we are going to still be on this journey of needing to reincarnate, of needing to come back to the physical world. Okay. Questions, comments? It's
So could I say that, Joel?
Yes.
Could I say that it's could I say that it's a primitive legacy that we haven't been able to uproot?
In a sense, yes, because if you look at more evolved spirits, you see very little traces of selfishness, right? When you see, like, even as spirits, because let's not go to Jesus, which is an example of a perfect spirit, but let's go to a Mother Teresa, right? And study the work that she has done throughout her life. You don't really see signs of selfishness there. Because she's not a perfect spirit, I'm sure there is still some small imperfections.
Traces,
there.
Traces.
Yeah, traces. But at our level, we look at her and we don't see it. I'm sure more evolved spirits than her will look at her and see some traces of it on some behavior, some decisions. But it's something that it's becoming less and less part of who she is. And actually, we're going to talk about it a little bit later in a couple of questions. Actually, we know her because she's famous. She was famous. But there are a lot of spirits incarnated here that are much less selfish than the average, that work for the benefit of others. You know, I was watching yesterday a woman on TV that she decided to start a choir for homeless. So these homeless, there are like 40 homeless that are singing together in a choir. Choir. Yes, and you know, she started this out of her just goodwill, out of her desire to help and assist. This is really someone that is in the process of overcoming her own selfishness, because when you do a work like that to help those that are really the lowest level of society in terms of living conditions, you know, you are making a difference. And now we have plenty of spirits incarnated here that we can see by the actions that they do, that they are in the process of fighting against their own selfishness. But we don't hear about them because they are the hidden gems of society in a way, right?
Joel, what about if I am selfish for the sake of self without being in detriment to others, without actually stepping onto others' wishes or desires or their own? Just for this.
For example.
Okay, I want to make $1 million a year, so I could have a penthouse in New York, a penthouse in Miami, a penthouse in San Juan, you know, something like that. I'm not being bad or not really.
No, but then selfishness goes into what do you do with the excess that you have? Excess wealth, excess time, excess ability to help. That's where selfishness is going to start. Because do you really need all of that?
Right.
If you probably don't need all of that.
No,
So
no, I don't need. No, of course I don't need it. No,
no, but I'm talking the theoretical case, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So the person doesn't need all of that. So there is selfishness there, because someone that has no selfishness live work to the bare necessity to survive and dedicate all their times, their spare time and the spare money to help others. Right?
Exactly. Yes, yes.
And I don't think any of us here do that, because we still have selfishness. In the end, you have to be very careful to separate where is selfishness, where is self-preservation, right? Because
exactly.
if you stop working and you stop being able to provide for yourself, you start becoming a burden to society. You are being selfishness also, because you are creating problems.
Very good.
Right?
Very good.
So you need to find your comfort level for you to be able to survive and to be able to dedicate time and resources, if you have, to help others. Okay?
To help others.
Yeah, Elmo, go ahead. Elmo?
I can't hear you.
Elmo, you raise your hand, can hear you. Oh, well, let's see. Well, Elmo, when you can, please start.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So the Paco's question is the topic of the first case that we're going to see in the Heaven and Hell, the second part. So I'll stay quiet for now.
Okay. I should stay. Okay.
John, I think I saw that program last night with the homeless.
Yes, you did, right?
That the lady, they were all homeless, and she made a group, and they were all now in a group of singing.
Yeah.
That broke my heart. It broke my heart.
It was beautiful.
Because,
it was beautiful.
Oh my goodness! I actually teared. It was really
me
hard.
too. Me too.
These,
Really?
what
They
she did.
Wow.
I teared up. You had to see them. They were all crying, and they were there singing. This lady took all, I don't know how many were they. They were a lot.
Yeah, they're like 30, right?
I think they were more than that.
Yeah.
More. They were much more. Over 50 more. Where did, unbelievable.
Yeah.
That was a selfless act if you ever seen.
Yeah, and you see, I immediately thought of those missionaries that are unknown to the general public, right? That are working for the benefit of humanity, and we don't even hear about them unless something like this happens. And they, like her, I'm sure there are a lot out there that are doing the same thing.
Sure. Especially now, what's going on now.
Yeah, exactly.
Dedication,
now we have
many people.
We have many working in this pandemic.
Yeah.
So sad. Where are we? Oh, 99114. Go ahead.
Yes.
As it is rooted in personal interest, it seems to be very difficult to entirely remove selfishness from the human heart. Is it possible? As human beings become enlightened in regard to spiritual things, they attach less value to material things. As they free themselves from the shackles of matter, they reform the human institutions that foster selflessness. This is accomplished through education.
Okay, so the first thing, this is accomplished through education. We are going to study much more deeper in the last question of this topic, when Fenelon is going to talk and Kardec then is going to comment. But education is really the basis, but we are going to talk about it later. On our path of evolution, right? We are always evolving, and we have to evolve morally and intellectually. The thing is, as we evolve intellectually, we create more wants for the general population, right? So a cell phone nowadays is both a necessity because we really, most of us need the cell phone to work and to live their lives, but it is also a want. It is also something that can generate selfishness, right? Because you want to have the latest model, you want to have the shiniest model. So 100 years ago, there were no cell phones, so there were not even phones. So there was no desire to have what we don't know that it exists. And we don't desire anything that we don't know that it exists 100 years from now. 100 years from now, society will develop and create more wants. So that's the intellectual evolvement. Now, the moral evolvement, the moral evolution generally goes slower than the intellectual evolution. So we need to catch up on the moral aspect, and that's when we become more enlightened in regard to spiritual things. As we learn that we are eternal souls who live forever. Then we start to incorporate the understanding and the notion to our daily lives and our understanding of our spiritual journey. So we will start to give less importance to material things. So it's great to have a good house. It's important because we can live our lives, but we don't need to have the biggest mansion of the neighborhood, right? Because this is selfishness. We just need to have a house that we are comfortably living. We don't need to have the latest gadget that is just launched. We just need to have the one that serves the purpose of helping us moving in our lives. But all this only comes with our spiritual knowledge, with the understanding of our eternal nature and of our spiritual nature. Understanding that when we go back to the spiritual world, none of these material things are going to be important. It doesn't mean that we are going to disconnect from them. We hear a lot of spirits that go back to the spiritual world and are still attached to material things and keep their minds connected to the minds of those that are connected to their material needs and end up struggling to free themselves. But that's how we are going to evolve. As we become more and more spiritual in our journey, we are going to start attaching less and less value to material things, and then we are going to be less and less selfish. Yes, Dani.
So there are a lot of things that we do that can be connected to our instinct, right? When we, as you mentioned, when we needed that instinct to survive. Mm-hmm. So even reacting to certain situations that you might be in an emergency or so, you trigger some instincts that are very old on us, right? That it goes back thousands, millions of years ago. So there are many examples we can see of people being selfish, but not necessarily for material needs like you were talking about. But for example, maybe a father or a mother could be acting in a selfish way, wanting the best for the family, for example. If they find in a competition between other families, among other families, they might, act in a way that, no, my family first. We're not talking about things, you're talking about opportunities or privileges or so many examples. So I don't know how can I formulate my question. This instinct of self-preservation seems to be something so
intrinsic.
Intrinsic, so part of us that I don't know. You would talk about coming back, reincarnating, but isn't that time already? Because it's been so long that we needed that instinct survival to fight a lion or, you know, feed the family.
We are still in the process, and we are still in the very early stages of overcoming our selfishness. You know, you look at history of humanity, and you look at kings and emperors and landowners of the past. Their behavior was 100% selfish, right? They would think of themselves and of their families. And again, if you are protecting your family, taking advantage of others, this is selfishness. You can argue, but it is selfishness because you are not thinking of the general good. You are thinking of the good of you and those close to you. Like, you know, when the Spirit said, criminals have their loved ones and have the ones that they want to protect also, right? So it's a criminal is a selfish individual spirit by nature, right? Because you are taking advantage of others, removing things from others that do not belong to you, but still they try to protect their loved ones. So doesn't mean that it's not selfish. It's still selfish. Even when you are protecting your family in material terms, you are being selfish. Yeah, but the thing is, we are imperfect. We have a lot of things to work. So the first step is to understand and to deal with what we can, right? Because we're not going to free ourselves of selfishness in 1, 2, or 10 incarnations. It's going to take longer. So, but if we are not aware of it, we cannot even start, right? So if we learn a little bit in this incarnation, we learn to share a little bit of our wealth, any wealth we have, time, money, knowledge, anything, we are in the process of fighting against our own selfishness, right? When you take your time to an extra time to help a child. I know you are a teacher, a child that needs extra help, and you are taking an extra time to help that child and not being paid for it. You are being paid for regular classes, but you are extending your help and assistance to a child that needs help. You are overcoming your own selfishness, right? You are working on overcoming. It's in small details that we are going to learn to overcome. But to say that we are defending our family so we are not selfish doesn't fly. If we are taking advantage, if we are defending our family at the expense of our other family, we're being selfish. And again, most of us are. I'm not saying that, I'm not making here, I'm just stating the reality. The reality, this is selfishness. But most of us still do, and we still are not prepared to not do it, right? Elmo, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, Daniela, you mentioned the word to compete. And I think in the need to compete in itself demonstrate a level of selfishness, not as individually, but in the society as a whole, right? And we are very likely to compete, let's say, to place our sons and daughters in a position, even though we know that the neighbor's sons or daughter are better prepared and you do a better job in that same position. In our selfishness, we deprive the common of good, putting the best person in that place to put our loved ones. But I think more important to go back to the answer there, John, please.
Okay, sure.
Is when the Spirit says over here, because perhaps this level of selfishness that you have today, if it's kind of understandable, perhaps even acceptable, based on what the Spirit says over here, as they free themselves, and say, as we free ourselves from the shocks of matter, we will reform the human institutions that foster selfishness. So that implies that we still have in our society institutions that foster selfishness. So perhaps we still have this little bit or a lot of selfishness in us that maybe it's still required because we live in a society that have institutions that foster selfishness.
Got it. Because of competition. Very good.
Because a competition should be extinguished as we evolve. But we cannot expect those institutions to be extinguished without us changing ourselves first. So first we must elevate ourselves, then we will elevate the institutions that we use.
Okay. Very good.
That makes sense.
Next.
That makes sense. Okay.
Next covers a little more of what we just discussed.
Our selfishness inherent to the human race would not always be obstacle to the reign of absolute goodness on earth. Selfishness is your greatest evil, but it belongs to the spirits incarnated on earth, who are of an inferior nature and not the entirety of the human race. Consequently, those spirits, in purifying themselves through successive lives, shed their selfishness like all their other impurities. Are there none amongst you who have rid themselves of selfishness and who practice charity on earth? There are more than you think, but they're not well known because virtue does not seek to bask in the spotlight. If one individual like these exists, why should there not be 10? If there are 10, why should there not be 1,000? And so on.
Okay, so here.
I'm a little bit lost. Go ahead.
Okay, so here what the spirits are telling us that at this planet of trials and atonements, or trials and expiations, where evil predominates over good, we have more spirits who are of a less evolved or inferior nature, but we have already spirits that are less selfish than others. We have spirits that have been able to rid themselves of or reduce the selfishness and practice charity on earth. The example we gave of that woman yesterday, in the choir. Oof, the word
Choir.
is not coming. Choir. The word is not coming today. Choir. And they're saying here there are more than you think. And I think this pandemic is showing us there are so many selfless people working to help society and doing homemade masks, going to volunteer in places where they are at risk of their own health, and they are they are not well known. So, like they say here, if there is one individual like that, then there is more. Why not 10? But if there are 10, why not 1,000? And remember, Divaldo said once that we need only 500 evolved spirits to incarnate at the same time on Earth to change the whole planet in terms of evolvement.
How many?
500. So, 500 in the middle of 8 billion. And, you have spirits like the Dalai Lama. You have a Dalai Lama, you have 500 Dalai Lamas incarnated, spread all over the world, and you are going to change the world. 500 St. Francis of Assisi. There are spirits, enough spirits that that can incarnate and help humanity as a whole. And these are spirits that, if they're still not perfect, they have almost no selfishness, like we gave the example of Mother Teresa in the beginning, right? So they're out there, and that's how we are evolving. Humanity is evolving. Again, someone that works to the benefit of humankind may be acting somewhat in a still selfish way, but the benefit to humanity, it's much greater than the amount of selfishness that this individual has. So the benefits outweigh the problems. Yes, Daniela.
I was thinking about that, exactly what they say here, like that the virtue does not seek to bask in the spotlight. And usually we have people who inspire us that are so above us. It can be even a little bit discouraging. Like, I'm not going to be Mother Teresa so soon. So it's easier to relate to people who are more like us. Or like the example you were giving, I didn't see the program of the women that put together the choir, but these are people who is more encouraging and inspiring sometimes to do something, like to do an action, not just to keep the ideal of a Mother Teresa or someone really like way, especially someone we never met. And another thing, it was interesting what Elmo was saying about the institutions. Then he got back to the text, and right after it's like through education, right? That the change can happen. And education there is a very big word, because schools in themselves are very competitive. Mm-hmm. So the core of the educational system, mostly, not there are exceptions, but the core of the educational systems is to compete.
Yeah, it's because the educational system is for us to evolve intellectually, not morally, right? Mm-hmm. So the education here, and we are going to see very soon with Fenelon and Kardec talking about it, is the moral education. It's not the formal education. Mm-hmm. The education that we need is the moral education.
Yeah, but it comes right after the institutions, right? So the educational system, it creates institutions, right? It's not only the house or the home. I think the more education ends up getting out of the schools or the institutional system, as Elmo was saying, or the text Elmo was pointing out in the text.
Yeah.
So.
Renato.
Yeah. Let me lower the hand here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So since we are talking about humanity, so I was thinking, in order to understand what we are in this mess, to go back and how everything happens. So I would imagine that in the beginning, since you said that the selfishness started with survival, and the basic in survival be to eat, and I think we start just killing for food.
Mm-hmm.
and just enough to eat on that day or whatever. And then we understood that, okay, food is not coming around all the time, so maybe I need to storage. And then I need to kill a little bit more and then storage food. And I think that concept of storing things and accumulate things were passed on to different things. So in your opinion, or I don't know if there's any text on that, where did we take a wrong turn and selfishness became a bad thing?
Elmo, you want to speak? You raised your hand, or you want me to answer first?
No, I'm going to speak in regard to the education.
Okay, so let me answer Renato, and then I'll pass to Elmo.
Sure.
It's not that I don't think we deviate from anything. It's just that our intellectual evolution, again, goes faster than our moral evolution. And with our intellectual evolution, we start giving too much importance to things that benefit us to the detriment of others. So it's I think it's part of our evolution to overcome our imperfections and to fight against our selfishness. But in the beginning, again, you talk about getting food, right? So ideally, if when we were cavemen and we find food, we would share with all the others that need food. But of course, we probably started there, saving more for ourselves, eating more, and not allowing others to eat, and or even killing the neighbors that want to steal our food. So in that, we give way to our instincts, and we keep giving way to our inferior instincts. And as we evolve, this carries on on our evolutionary path. And as long as the intellectual evolution goes in front of the moral evolution, we are going to continue acting on our selfishness before we start sharing everything with our neighbors, with our brothers and sisters. Okay, Elmo.
Okay, so in regard to education, on the question 685, in the comments that Kardec gives on the question, I'm just going to read part of the comment that's I find extremely eloquent when it comes to education. He says, not merely intellectual education, but moral education, that which consists in the formation of character and habits in human beings, and in human beings that do not learn from books. Education is the sum of habits acquired. And I think that is the education that the spirits are referring on that answer.
Very good. Yeah.
Definitely. I think the next question talks a little bit of what we've been discussing here. Because it apparently our selfishness only increases, right? But so read Paco and would comment on it.
Selfishness increases with the civilization that seems to strengthen and intensify it. How can the cause destroy the effect? The greater the wickedness, the more hideous it is. Selfishness has to do a vast amount of harm, so that you may understand how crucial the need is to eradicate it. When human beings overcome selfishness, they will live like brothers and sisters by mutually helping each other through a sense of solidarity. The strong will then support the weak rather than oppress them, and no one will lack the necessities of life because everyone will obey the law of justice. This reign of good is what the spirits are responsible for preparing.
Okay, so sometimes we need to do a lot of harm to start, we as a human society, to start becoming aware of the harm that we are doing. And let's give an example of our planet, right? 50, 70 years ago, nobody was saying that we were destroying the planet. We were already harming the planet, but it was not in anyone's radar. Now, recently, since I believe since the 70s, when we start talking about how much we are damaging and harming the planet, is because we have done already a vast amount of harm to the planet. So it's the same thing when, as we evolve and we learn the necessity to live with each other and to help each other so we can all together progress, evolve, we are going to become less selfishness. But this comes only with time. And again, we look around and you think that things here now are worse than they were 30, 40 years ago, and actually things are much better. Of course, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so you may think otherwise, but things are much better today than they were 30, 50, 100 years ago in terms of justice, in terms of helping the needy. You know, when this book was written, when the spirits wrote that the strong will then support the weak rather than oppress them, and no one will lack the necessities of life because everyone will obey the law of justice. This was completely unheard of. And nowadays, you can see spots in the world, still small spots, or you know, a few countries that already have a system in place where you have most of these things in place, right? You know, if I was reading about New Zealand that overcame the coronavirus, almost didn't have the virus there, and how the system works there, you see a society that everyone is trying to help each other and everyone is thinking of the good of all. Again, I'm not going to say that 100% of those incarnated there are perfect spirits, and they are not. They are imperfect. They have problems like all of us, but they are already at a stage where most of them are helping each other. Most of them are thinking of the greater good instead of thinking of their own personal good. So it is possible, it is achievable, but it takes time. And we are going to continue evolving and working, and the first step is to understand the need. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good question.
So before you start here, Paco, how can we overcome selfishness?
Wow, that's a big one.
Yes, and that's the answer is it has the name of Fenelon, which some of you heard, but I'm going to tell you a little bit who was Fenelon. Fenelon was a French archbishop, theologian, and poet and writer. He lived between 1650 and 1715. So this is 150 years, more or less, before Spiritism. And some of his thoughts so you can see he was already an evolved spirit at the time that he was living here. For Fenelon, all wars were civil wars. Humanity was a single society, and all wars within it the greatest evil. For he argued that one's obligation to humankind as a whole was always greater than what was owed to one particular country. It's very impressive that someone says that in the 1650s,
Yes.
1700s, right? So he was a man ahead of his time, an evolved spirit. and he's one of the spirits that collaborated with Kardec in the spiritism. There are some messages from him in the gospel according to spiritism, and this answer that he gives on how to overcome selfishness. And you can see when he talks about all wars are civil wars, and actually there is another that I'm going to read from him here, is that a person is no less a member of the human race, which is society as a whole, than a family is a member of a particular nation. Each individual owes incomparably more to the human race, which is the greater fatherland, than to the particular country in which he or she was born. As a family is to the nation, so is the nation to the universal commonwealth. Wherefore, it is infinitely more harmful for nation to wrong nation than for family to wrong family. To abandon the sentiment of humanity is not merely to renounce civilization and to relapse into barbarism. It is to share into the blindness of the most brutish brigands and savages. It is to be a man no longer, but a cannibal. Very strong. So now let's hear what he says about selfishness, how to overcome selfishness.
How can we overcome selfishness? Of all human imperfections, selfishness is the most difficult to uproot. It is influenced by matter, from which human beings, still too close to their origin, have not yet been able to break loose, as human laws, society, and education all support it. Selfishness will be gradually weakened as your moral life gains dominance over your material life, through the knowledge that Spiritism gives you regarding the reality of your future life, stripped of allegories and metaphors. When Spiritism is properly understood and identified with beliefs and habits of humankind, it will transform all your customs, traditions, and social relations. Selfishness is based on the importance you attribute to your own personality. Spiritism makes you look at everything from such an elevated standpoint that all sense of individuality is lost in confronting this immensity. Spiritism battles selfishness by destroying self-importance and revealing its true nature. Okay. Human beings often become selfish by experiencing the selfishness of others, which makes them feel the need to put themselves on the defensive. Seeing that others think of themselves and not of you causes you to think of yourself rather than others. Charity and fraternity must become the basis of all social institutions, the legal relations between nations and individuals. Only then will individuals think less of their own personal interests, because they will realize that others have thought of them. Humankind will then experience the upright influence of example and contact. Amidst the present deluge of selfishness, considerable virtue is needed for human beings to sacrifice their own interests for the sake of others. And those who make such a sacrifice often receive little gratitude for such restraint. Those who possess this virtue are welcomed into the kingdom of heaven with open arms, while those who have thought only of themselves will be cast aside on Judgment Day and left to suffer in loneliness.
Okay, so first you see the language of an archbishop, right? Kingdom of heaven and Judgment Day. But what Fenelon tells us here is that it's very difficult in a society that gives more importance to people give more importance to themselves, think of themselves before others. It's very difficult for you to be different from everybody. It's easier, like like the what we were discussing with Daniela, right? You are competing against others, so you want your loved ones to have the advantage of others, because you know that others are doing exactly the same. So how we are going to overcome this? Well, kindness is contagious. So the more people become kinder to others, become charitable to others, more people will join, because we learn from examples, and when we look at examples like the one we gave, we talked about earlier, and we are inspired by the examples of others that are acting selflessness and selflessness, and are helping human beings, other human beings, helping society. Not every one of us will be influenced, but some of us will be influenced. So this example creates others that will try to follow the same example, and that will end up creating organizations that exist only to help those in need, and more people will join these organizations. So you start spreading it, and eventually those that are charitable, and those that are thinking of others before thinking of themselves will become much more common, and much more in a bigger number than those that are still act on a selfishness way. At this stage of humanity, we're still not there, but we see the examples, and we see he gives us, Fenelon gives us here the recipe for it. Is when individuals think less of their own personal interest, because they will realize that others have thought of them. So many of us need others to start acting with selflessness towards us, for us to start overcoming our selfishness also. But it is a process, it is a work in progress, and slowly it will spread, because the planet is evolving. So everything that all our relations are evolved, and society is evolving, and as society evolves, we change the laws to protect and benefit those in need, and to prevent those that have the power to take advantage of those that do not have. Again, the process, it takes time. We are going to be still working on that for several incarnations, but we are becoming aware of it, so it is possible.
Wow. Okay.
So just read Kardec's comment, because he talks about education that Elmo mentioned earlier, and it's important also.
Okay. Praiseworthy efforts are being put forward to help advance the progress of humanity. Kind and charitable thoughts are encouraged, stimulated, and honored now more than at any other time in history. And yet selfishness continues to plague society. It is a social disease that affects everyone, of which everyone is more or less the victim, and should be fought like any other epidemic. To this end, we must emulate the methodology of a skilled physician and begin by tracing the disease to its origin. We must seek out in every division of human society, from families to nations, from the hat to the palate, all the obvious and obscure causes and influences that sustain and foster selfishness. Once the causes of the disease are established, the remedy presents itself spontaneously through the combined efforts of all, and the virus is destroyed gradually. The cure may take a long time, because the causes are numerous, but it is not impossible. That being said, it can only be successful by getting to the roots of the evil, that is, through education. Not education that aims only to educate people, but the one that also aims to make them moral individuals. Proper education is the key to moral progress. When the art of training the moral nature of human beings is easily understood as the art of training the intellect, a corrupt nature can be straightened out just like a crooked staple. However, this practice demands a great deal of tact, experience, and profound observation. It is a huge mistake to assume that possessing scientific knowledge alone is enough to enable the teacher to exercise it successfully. If we study, for instance, the lives of children, whether rich or poor, and know all the bad influence that acts upon their weaknesses from the moment of their birth, taking into account the ignorance and negligence of those who are responsible for the upbringing of these children, and the improper means employed in moralizing them, it is no wonder to find so much wrong in the world. If the same skill and care is given to the training of the moral nature as to that of the intellect, human beings would discover that if there are obstinate natures, there are also, in greater numbers than you might think, those who require only the proper cultivation in order to yield good fruit. Human beings may want to be happy, and this natural desire prompts them to work tirelessly to improve their condition on earth and seek out the causes of their ills in order to address them. When they understand thoroughly that selfishness stimulates pride, ambition, greed, envy, hatred, and jealousy, and causes constant distress, that it brings trouble to all social relations, provokes conflict, destroys confidence, turns, turns
Friends into enemies.
turns friends into enemies, and forces each individual to remain constantly on the defense against each other. Then they will also see that selfishness is incompatible with both happiness and security. The more they suffer from selfishness, the more intensely they feel the need to fight it, just as they fight diseases, dangerous animals, and every source of disaster. They are compelled to act as such out of their own best interest. Selfishness is the source of all vices, just as charity is the source of all virtues. Destroying one while developing the others should be the goal for all those who seek to guarantee happiness in the present life and in the next.
You see, this is a brilliant comment from Kardec, and you see here Kardec the educator, right? He brings
He's an educator, no?
Yes, he brings the idea of only through education, but proper education is the key to moral progress. But educate, aiming to make them moral individuals. So when we do that, and we go to the last paragraph here, selfishness is the source of all vices, just as charity is the source of all virtues. Destroying one while developing others. So because as you become less and less selfishness, the only way to do it is by practicing more charity, by helping others, by thinking of others before you think of yourself. You are practicing charity. And by practicing charity, you are learning to be less selfishness. But this demands education, moral education, education of the soul, of the understanding of our intellect, our eternal nature, of our spiritual nature, and accepting and becoming part of who we are. Elmo. Elmo?
I didn't raise my hand.
Yes. No, it's raised. No.
No.
Okay. So you know, it's 7:30, so we started 7:31. We went a little over. But I think it's really worth to read it again. I recommend everyone to read, to think about it, because in the end, we need to learn to work to overcome our own selfishness, and we need to address aspects of ourselves. And we are going to get very soon into the question, know thyself, which is the only way that we will understand better about ourselves, and we will learn how to fight selfishness that we have, the issues that we have. But it's a very profound answer, both from Fenelon and a comment from Kardec, that is worth reading again, studying a little bit, and reflecting on it, because there is a lot of information and a lot of lessons there that can be useful to our evolutionary journey. Okay. So let me stop sharing here. Thank you all.
Thank you.